The gray sedan had been following Nyla Reed for 11 days. She noticed it first on a Tuesday morning, idling 3 houses down from the servants' quarters where she lived with her mother. The driver never got out. Never rolled down the window. Just watched as she walked the long path from the back gate of Ravenport Heights to St. Hilaire Primary School. By the second week, the car had moved closer. Now it parked directly across from the gate, engine running, tinted windows reflecting nothing but her own small figure hurrying past. Nyla was 8 years old, and she knew what predators looked like. She'd seen them in nature documentaries, the way they stalked at the edges of herds, picking out the weak ones, the ones separated from protection. She knew she was separated. Black and small and the daughter of a housekeeper in a place where people like her existed only to clean toilets and press shirts. The security guards at the main gate saw her every morning. They never asked her name. On the 12th day, she stopped walking to school. She walked instead toward the man everyone feared. Kang Dae-hyun stood near the marble fountain in the central courtyard of Ravenport Heights, speaking in low Korean to 2 men in dark suits. He was 43, lean and precise, with silver threading through his black hair. His reputation arrived in rooms before he did. Drug lord, some whispered. Trafficker, said others. The police had been trying to prove either for 7 years and had nothing but circumstantial threads that dissolved in courtrooms. What everyone knew for certain was that Kang controlled Ravenport Heights the way a conductor controls an orchestra, every note timed, every player aware that one wrong move meant ejection. Nyla walked straight across the pristine lawn toward him. A security guard moved to intercept her, hand already reaching for his radio, but something in her stride made him hesitate. She wasn't running. Wasn't crying. She walked like someone who had made a decision that couldn't be unmade. She stopped 3 feet from Kang Dae-hyun and looked up at him with dark eyes that held no illusion of childhood innocence. Those eyes had already learned too much. "If you walk me to school," she said quietly, "he'll stop following me." The courtyard went silent. One of Kang's men took a step forward, but Kang raised one finger and the man froze. For a long moment, the crime lord simply looked at the child. He saw the carefully braided hair, the backpack with a broken zipper held together with safety pins, the uniform skirt that had been hemmed twice to extend its life. He saw the fear she was trying to hide, and beneath that, something more dangerous than fear. Calculation. This child had weighed her options and decided that a monster she could see was preferable to the monster in the gray sedan. "You know who I am?" Kang asked in accented English. "Yes." "And you think I would protect you?" "You have rules about children," Nyla said. "You told your men. No harm to kids. No drugs near schools. I heard my mother talking about it." Kang's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. The fact that the household staff discussed his business should have angered him. Instead, he felt something closer to curiosity. This child had done reconnaissance. She'd listened, evaluated, and approached him based on intelligence gathering. She was 8 years old. "What makes you think the rules apply to you?" "I'm a child," Nyla said simply. One of Kang's men, Park Min-jae, stepped closer and spoke rapid Korean that Nyla couldn't understand but whose tone was unmistakable. "This is inappropriate. This is dangerous. This crosses lines." Kang responded in the same language, just 2 words, and Park's jaw tightened but he said nothing more. Kang looked down at Nyla again. "Show me the car." They walked together to the front gate, Kang's presence causing residents to stop their morning jogs and stare. The housekeeper's daughter walking beside Kang Dae-hyun was like watching gravity reverse itself. It simply didn't happen. By the time they reached the gate, a small crowd had formed at a respectful distance, pretending not to watch while watching everything. The gray sedan sat exactly where Nyla had described, engine idling. Through the tinted windshield, Kang could make out a silhouette. The moment the driver saw Kang, the car pulled away slowly, almost casually, but Kang had been reading body language in vehicles for 2 decades. The driver was rattled. "Every morning?" Kang asked. "Yes." "Same time?" "Yes." "But closer each day." Kang pulled out his phone and took a photo of the sedan's license plate before it turned the corner. Then he looked at Nyla and said something that would change both their lives. "Tomorrow morning. 7:15. Be at this gate. Nyla nodded once and walked toward school. She didn't say thank you. Something told her that Kang Dae-hyun didn't do things that required gratitude. He did things that required respect. That night, Marisol Reed came home to the servants' quarters and found her daughter sitting at their small kitchen table, homework spread around her but untouched. Marisol was 29 but looked 37, the particular aging that comes from years of invisible labor and swallowed fear. She cleaned houses in Ravenport Heights, 3 different estates, 6 days a week. She sent money to family in Jamaica and saved nothing for herself because there was nothing left to save. "Baby, you didn't eat the sandwich I left," Marisol said, an accent softened by years in America but still present in the lilt of her words. "Mama, I need to tell you something." Marisol sat down, exhaustion pulling at her features. "What's wrong?" "There's a car. A man. He follows me to school." Marisol's hand went to her mouth. "How long?" 12 days. 12 days? And you didn't tell me? You would have told me to ignore it, to keep my head down, to be invisible." Marisol started to protest but the words died. Her daughter was right. Those were exactly the words she would have used, the same words her own mother had used, the inherited wisdom of women who survived by being small. "What did you do?" Marisol asked, and the fear in her voice made Nyla's chest tight. "I asked Mr. Kang for help." Marisol stood up so fast her chair fell backward. "You did what?" "He has rules about children. He'll walk me to school." "Nyla, you don't understand. Men like Kang Dae-hyun, they don't help people like us. They own things. They control things. You go near him, you become a thing he controls." "He already said yes." Marisol's hands were shaking. She walked to the window, looked out at the main estate glowing with warm lights and expensive landscaping, then turned back to her daughter. "We leave. Tonight. We pack and we go." "Go where, Mama? You have 3 jobs here. We have a place to sleep. Where do we go that's safer than this?" "Anywhere. Anywhere is safer than being noticed by Kang Dae-hyun." But Nyla shook her head with a certainty that broke Marisol's heart because it sounded so adult, so aware of how little protection the world offered. "The man in the car already noticed me. At least Mr. Kang has rules." Marisol sank back into her chair and put her head in her hands. She wanted to argue, to assert parental authority, to say no with the force that would make her daughter obey. But she knew her daughter was right. They had nowhere to go. No resources. No network. In the algebra of their survival, Kang Dae-hyun might actually be the better variable. "If he touches you," Marisol whispered. "If he does anything." "He won't, Mama. He's not that kind of monster." "How do you know?" "Because he looked at me like I was a problem to solve, not a thing to use." At 7:15 the next morning, Nyla stood at the front gate in her school uniform with her broken backpack. Kang Dae-hyun emerged from his villa precisely on time, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Marisol made in 6 months. Park Min-jae walked 3 steps behind him, face unreadable. The morning joggers stopped jogging. The dog walkers stopped walking. A woman on her balcony dropped her coffee mug. Kang looked at Nyla. "Ready?" They walked. Kang set a pace that was brisk but manageable for her smaller legs. He didn't hold her hand. Didn't put a protective arm around her shoulders. Simply walked beside her, close enough that anyone watching would understand she was under his protection, distant enough that it remained transactional. Park Min-jae followed 10 feet back, scanning the streets with the practiced eye of someone who knew violence intimately. The gray sedan was there, parked 2 blocks from the school. The moment Kang came into view, the engine started. But the car didn't move. The driver was making a calculation. Kang stopped walking, turned his head toward the sedan, and simply looked. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Then the sedan pulled away, this time with speed, the tires squealing slightly as it turned the corner. Kang walked Nyla to the school gates. Teachers stared. Other children whispered. Nyla turned to face him. "Thank you," she said. Kang's expression remained neutral. "Tomorrow. Same time." He walked away without another word, Park Min-jae falling into step beside him. They were half a block away when Park finally spoke. This is a mistake. Noted, Kang replied in Korean. They'll think you've gone soft. Worse, they'll think you've become attached. Attachment is weakness. Then let them think I'm weak, Kang said, switching to English. Let them make the mistake of testing that theory. Park was quiet for a moment. The license plate. The sedan. I ran it. And? Registered to a shell company. 3 layers deep. But I found the connection. The ash ring. Kang stopped walking. The ash ring was a trafficking syndicate that operated along the East Coast, specializing in children. They moved product, as they called it, across state lines using a network of safe houses and corrupted officials. Kang had refused to work with them twice, turning down lucrative partnerships because their trade disgusted him in a way that drug running did not. There were lines even in the underworld, and the ash ring lived beyond every single one. They're testing boundaries, Kang said quietly. Seeing how close they can operate to my territory. And now you've showed them which chess piece you'll move to protect. Kang resumed walking. Then let's make sure they understand the cost of taking that piece. For 3 days, Kang walked Nyla to school. Each morning, residents of Ravenport Heights watched with increasing fascination. By day 4, the gossip had spread beyond the estate. The local newspaper's society page ran a photo with the caption, "Unlikely Alliance," showing Kang Dae-hyun walking beside a small black girl in a school uniform. The article speculated wildly about connections, questioned whether this was some kind of publicity stunt, wondered if Kang was being blackmailed. None of them considered the simplest explanation, that a child had asked for help and a man had chosen to give it. On the 5th day, Marisol received a phone call while cleaning the master bathroom of the Morrison estate. The voice on the other end was mechanical, processed through a modulator that stripped it of identifying characteristics. Your daughter walks with Kang Dae-hyun. Marisol's blood went cold. Who is this? You've made her visible. Visibility has consequences. Please, she's just a child. Kang protects one black child. We'll take for that no one's watching. Tell him. 1 for 4. Those are the stakes. The line went dead. Marisol dropped the phone. Her hands shook so violently she had to grip the marble countertop to stay upright. She'd spent 8 years making herself invisible, teaching her daughter to be invisible, operating under the belief that invisibility equaled safety. But her daughter had refused that inheritance, and now the price was being calculated in the bodies of other people's children. She found Kang that evening in the estate's private restaurant where he met with associates. She shouldn't have been there. The staff knew never to interrupt his dinners. But Marisol walked straight through the doors, past the hostess who tried to stop her, past the security guard reaching for his weapon, straight to Kang's table where he sat with 3 Korean men discussing business in their native language. They called me, Marisol said, her voice shaking. They said if you protect one, they'll take 4. The restaurant went silent. Kang looked at her with an expression that revealed nothing. Then he stood, gestured to Park Min-jae, and walked with Marisol to a private room in the back. The 3 men at the table exchanged glances but said nothing. They understood that Kang Dae-hyun never acted without reason. In the private room, Marisol repeated everything the caller had said. Her voice broke twice but she made it through. When she finished, Kang poured her a glass of water from the pitcher on the side table and waited until she drank. Did you recognize the voice? He asked. No. It was disguised. Mechanical. Did they mention names? Locations? No. Just 4 children. Black children. They said no one would look for them. Kang's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Park Min-jae, standing by the door, spoke in Korean. Kang responded in the same language, his tone clipped and precise. Whatever he said made Park straighten slightly, a physical acknowledgement of orders received. Mrs. Reed, Kang said, turning back to Marisol. Your daughter asked me to walk her to school because she understood something that most people don't. Power unused is power wasted. I chose to use mine. That choice has consequences. But not for her. Not for other children. The consequences fall on the people who think they can weaponize fear. But they said, I know what they said. They want me to withdraw protection from Nyla, to demonstrate that I can be manipulated through threat. They miscalculated. Kang pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking rapid Korean for 30 seconds before hanging up. I'm putting a security detail on 4 schools in the Blackwater District. Plainclothes. Anyone approaches a child inappropriately, they'll be stopped. Marisol's eyes filled with tears. But why would you do this? You don't even know those children. Because the ash ring is correct about one thing. No one is watching. That ends today. Over the next 48 hours, things shifted in Ravenport Heights and the surrounding neighborhoods in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. Parents in Blackwater District, the marginalized community bordering the estate, started noticing men in casual clothes stationed near school zones. Not cops. Something else. When a man in a dark sedan tried to approach a girl leaving Martin Elementary, 2 of the plainclothes men intervened so quickly and quietly that most witnesses didn't even realize what had happened. The man was escorted to an alley. He didn't return. Word spread the way it always does in communities that live on the margins. Kang Dae-hyun was protecting the children. Not just his own people. All the children. The why didn't matter as much as the what. For the first time in memory, someone with power was using it on their behalf. On the 7th morning of walking Nyla to school, something unexpected happened. As they left the gate of Ravenport Heights, an elderly black woman fell into step 10 feet behind them. She said nothing. Simply walked. A block later, a black man in his 30s joined her. Then a Latina woman with 2 children. By the time they reached St. Hilaire Primary School, 17 people walked in a loose formation around Kang and Nyla. No chanting. No signs. No political slogans. Just presence. Bodies reclaiming space. Eyes watching. Kang noticed but didn't acknowledge them. At the school gate, he stopped as usual. Nyla looked back at the small crowd and then up at Kang. They're protecting me too now, she said. Yes. Because you did first. No, Kang said quietly. Because they were always willing to. They just needed someone to break the silence first. That afternoon, 4 children disappeared from Blackwater District. 3 girls, 1 boy, ages 7 to 10. Taken between school release and dinner time, the window when children walk home alone because their parents are still at work. By the time the parents realized something was wrong and called police, 6 hours had passed. The police took statements with the practiced disinterest of officers who'd taken similar statements before and filed them in drawers that no one ever opened again. One of the mothers called every local news station. None ran the story. 4 missing black and Latino children in Blackwater District wasn't news. It was statistics. Kang received the photos at 9 p.m. They were sent to his personal phone, a number that fewer than 10 people knew. 4 children, blindfolded and cable-tied in what looked like a basement. The message was clear. Your move. Park Min-jae stood in Kang's study, waiting. They want you to negotiate. To trade something for the children. No, Kang said, studying the photos. They want me to do nothing. To prove that my gesture with Nyla was performative. Empty. They want me to demonstrate that I'll protect 1 child for show but not 4 children at cost. And what will you do? Kang set down his phone and looked at his oldest friend and most trusted lieutenant. I'm going to make them regret ever touching a child in my territory. Your territory is Ravenport Heights. Blackwater is different jurisdiction. Different police. Different rules. Then we'll change the rules. Kang made a call that should have been impossible. Detective Carla Mendez was the kind of cop who still believed in the work, which meant she'd been punished for that belief with assignments no one wanted in cases that went nowhere. She'd been investigating trafficking along the coast for 3 years with a budget of 0 and support from no one. When her phone rang at 10 p.m. with an unknown number, she almost didn't answer. Detective Mendez, my name is Kang Dae-hyun. We need to meet. She knew the name. Every cop knew the name. Why would I meet with you? Because 4 children disappeared today from Blackwater District and you're the only detective in the city who actually gives a damn. They met in a parking garage, the kind of location that felt like a crime movie cliché but actually made sense. Private, minimal security cameras, good sightlines. Park Min-jae checked Mendez for wires, which she tolerated with barely suppressed rage because she wanted information more than she wanted dignity. Kang handed her a folder. Inside were photos of the 4 children, details about the shell companies connected to the Ash Ring, and financial records showing payments to city officials that Mendez had been trying to trace for 18 months. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "I have resources." "You're a criminal." "Yes. And right now, I'm a criminal who wants the same thing you want." Those children found. The people who took them in prison. Mendez looked at the documents, her jaw working. Everything in this folder would be inadmissible in court, fruit of the poisonous tree, tainted by its source. But it was also true. She could see the architecture of the trafficking network laid out with a clarity she'd never achieved through official channels. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care?" "Because a child asked me for protection and I said yes. That yes has implications. Pretty expensive implications for someone in your line of work. Only if I lose." Mendez closed the folder. "I help you with this, I'm finished as a cop. My career, my reputation, everything." "You were already finished, detective. They've been burying your reports for 3 years. The difference is that now you can do something that matters before they force you out." She wanted to argue. Wanted to defend the institution she'd served for 11 years. But he was right. She'd filed 17 reports about trafficking indicators in Blackwater District and neighboring areas. Not one had resulted in an investigation. When she pushed, she was told to focus on quality-of-life crimes, on shoplifting and vandalism. The message was clear. Some victims matter. Others don't. "I want full immunity for myself and my team," Mendez said. "Agreed. And when this is over, you leave those children alone. No foundation named after you. No redemption tour. You don't get to buy virtue with their trauma." Kang met her eyes. "Agreed." They worked through the night, cross-referencing Kang's intelligence with Mendez's case files. The Ash Ring operated out of a warehouse complex near the waterfront, using legitimate shipping businesses as cover. They had police on payroll, which explained why reports disappeared. But they also had a weakness. Their network relied on a central hub, a processing location where they held children before moving them. Take the hub and the whole operation collapsed. By 4 a.m., they had a plan. By 6 a.m., Mendez had assembled a team of 5 officers she trusted. By 7 a.m., they had warrants signed by the one judge in the city who couldn't be bought. And at 7:30 a.m., while Kang was walking Nyla to school with their growing escort of community members, Mendez and her team executed simultaneous raids on 3 locations. They found the 4 children in the basement of a seafood processing plant, along with 2 more children who'd been missing for weeks. They found records of dozens of transactions. They found evidence linking the Ash Ring to officials at every level of city government. And they found 6 men who suddenly became very interested in cooperation when faced with federal trafficking charges. By 9 a.m., the news broke. Every local station ran the story because 6 rescued children plus a corruption scandal equaled ratings. The mayor called a press conference. The police chief praised the outstanding work of Detective Mendez and her team. No one mentioned Kang Dae-hyun because no one except Mendez knew he'd been involved. Nyla saw the news on the television in her classroom when her teacher put it on for current events. She recognized one of the rescued children, a girl named Emma who lived 3 blocks away. Emma's mother had cleaned houses alongside Marisol until she got sick and couldn't work anymore. Nyla had seen Emma at the corner store, buying bread with food stamps, her eyes always watchful, always aware of how little protected them. After school, instead of waiting for Kang, Nyla walked home with the community escort that had formed. The elderly black woman who'd been the first to join them introduced herself as Mrs. Johnson. She'd lived in Blackwater for 40 years and lost a granddaughter to trafficking 8 years ago. The body was never found. "Your mama must be so worried about you," Mrs. Johnson said as they walked. "She is. She's always worried. That's what we do. Because we've learned that no one else will worry for us." Nyla thought about that. But Mr. Kang worried. Mrs. Johnson was quiet for a moment. Mr. Kang recognized an opportunity. "That's different than worrying. But I'll say this, child. Sometimes opportunity and doing right look the same from the outside. Maybe that's enough." That evening, Blackwater District held a community meeting at the rec center. It wasn't planned or organized through official channels. Someone put up flyers. People came. The room was packed with parents, grandparents, teenagers who'd been walking younger siblings to school for years because there was no one else to do it. Marisol stood near the back, Nyla beside her. She hadn't planned to speak. Had actively decided not to speak because speaking meant visibility and visibility meant danger. But then she looked at her daughter, at this child who'd walked straight up to a crime lord and demanded protection, and something shifted. Marisol raised her hand. The woman running the meeting, a local pastor named Reverend Williams, pointed to her. "Yes, sister?" Marisol's voice shook. "My name is Marisol Reed. I clean houses in Ravenport Heights. I've been invisible for 8 years because I thought that would keep us safe." People turned to look at her. She felt their attention like weight. "My daughter was being followed by a man in a gray sedan. For 12 days. I didn't know what to do. Didn't know who to call. Because I knew, we all know, that people like us, when we call for help, no one comes." Heads nodded. They knew. "So my daughter, she's 8 years old, she walked up to Kang Dae-hyun and asked him to walk her to school. And he did. And then when the Ash Ring took 4 children to punish him for helping one, he didn't back down. He used his power. His terrible, criminal power. And those children came home." Marisol's voice broke, but she pushed through. "I don't know what that means. I don't know if we should trust him or fear him or both. But I know that for the first time since I came to this country, someone with power used it to protect my child. Not because we paid him. Not because we had anything to offer. But because she asked." Another parent stood, a Latino man named Carlos whose son had been one of the rescued children. "My boy is home tonight because someone finally decided we mattered. That's not justice. That's not how it should work. But it's more than we had yesterday." More people stood. Not everyone. Some stayed seated, arms crossed, skeptical of any alliance with someone like Kang. The debate went on for 2 hours. Anger and hope and fear all mixed together in voices that rarely got heard beyond these walls. Reverend Williams finally called for quiet. "Here's what I know. We can't rely on criminals to save us. We can't wait for powerful men to have a change of heart. But we can learn something from what happened. When we walk together, when we show up for each other's children, when we refuse to be invisible, that has power too. Maybe that's the real lesson. Not that Kang Dae-hyun helped, but that we realized we could help each other." The meeting ended with no firm resolutions, no action plan, just a feeling that something had shifted in the community's understanding of itself. As people filed out, Marisol felt someone touch her elbow. She turned to find Detective Mendez standing there in civilian clothes. "Mrs. Reed? I'm Detective Carla Mendez. I led the raid that recovered the children." "Thank you," Marisol said. "Thank you for bringing them home." "I need you to understand something," Mendez said quietly. "The reports about trafficking in this area, about predators targeting your children, they didn't start yesterday. I've been filing them for 3 years. They were buried. Ignored. It took Kang Dae-hyun's resources to make anyone pay attention. That should make you angry." "I am angry," Marisol said. "I'm so angry I can barely breathe sometimes. But right now, I'm just grateful my baby is safe." Mendez handed her a card. "I'm starting a community watch program. Training parents on what to look for, how to report, how to document. I can't promise the system will work. But I can promise I won't stop trying to make it work." Marisol took the card. "Why do you care?" "Because I'm tired of filing reports that disappear. I'm tired of being told that some children matter less than others. And I'm tired of pretending that the system isn't designed to fail you." 3 weeks later, Kang Dae-hyun held a press conference at a downtown hotel. The room was packed with journalists, city officials who showed up to cover their political bases, and community leaders who came because refusing seemed dangerous. Kang stood at the podium in an immaculate navy suit and announced the formation of the Dae-hyun Children's Trust. The trust would fund school security, after-school programs, and anonymous reporting systems for at-risk children. It would provide college scholarships for students from Blackwater District. It would employ community members as safety monitors. The initial funding was $5 million, with more to come. The journalists asked questions about his motivations, his business interests, whether this was reputation laundering. Kang answered each question with the same practiced neutrality, giving nothing away, maintaining the careful distance that kept people uncertain whether he was a villain attempting redemption or simply a criminal with rules. Nyla watched the press conference on the television in her apartment. She'd been watching Kang for 3 weeks now, seeing how he moved through the world, how he used power without ever appearing to exert effort. She understood something that the adults in the room didn't. Kang Dae-hyun was not a good man. He'd done terrible things and would likely do terrible things again. But he had rules. And sometimes rules were enough. The next morning, Kang didn't walk Nyla to school. Instead, 6 community members showed up at 7:15, forming the escort that had become routine. Mrs. Johnson was there, and Carlos, and 3 others whose names Nyla was learning. They walked her to school the way they now walked dozens of children, a human safety net woven from attention and care. Nyla entered the school and turned back to wave. They waved back. And for the first time since the gray sedan appeared, she felt something other than fear. Not safety exactly, but possibility. The possibility that being seen could mean being protected. That speaking could change things. That power, even criminal power, could be redirected towards something other than harm. She thought of Kang Dae-hyun and wondered if he understood what he'd actually done. He'd walked her to school to solve a problem, to assert control, to send a message to rivals. But in doing so, he'd shown a community that someone could walk beside them. And once they saw it was possible, they started walking beside each other. That afternoon, the gray sedan appeared one more time. It idled across from St. Hilaire Primary School at dismissal time, engine running, tinted windows reflecting the afternoon sun. When the children started emerging, the driver watched. Waiting. Calculating. Then 3 adults stepped into the street. Not Kang. Not police. Just parents. They stood between the sedan and the children, arms crossed, phones out and recording. Behind them, more adults appeared. 7. 10. 15. They didn't approach the car. Didn't shout. Simply stood there, visible, witnessing, refusing to look away. The gray sedan pulled away slowly, turned the corner, and never returned to that neighborhood again. Nyla walked home with her escort, her mother meeting them 3 blocks from school. Marisol pulled her daughter close, breathing in the smell of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her safe in her arms. "Mama," Nyla said against her shoulder. "People are watching now." "Yes, baby. They are." "Is that enough?" Marisol thought about that question. About 8 years of invisibility. About the gray sedan and the 4 children who almost weren't rescued. About Kang Dae-hyun and his terrible, useful power. About Detective Mendez and her buried reports. About a community that learned to show up for itself. "I don't know if it's enough," Marisol said honestly. "But it's more than we had. And tomorrow, we'll make it more again. That's how this works. We keep adding more. More eyes watching. More voices speaking. More people refusing to let children disappear." They walked home together as the sun set over Blackwater District, casting long shadows that stretched across streets that had been walked by generations of people trying to survive systems designed for their erasure. The shadows looked different now. Less like places to hide and more like spaces to occupy. In his villa in Ravenport Heights, Kang Dae-hyun stood at his window overlooking the estate. Park Min-jae brought him a report on the Ash Ring's collapse, their network dismantled, key operators facing federal charges. The operation had been successful. His message had been sent. "Don't test my boundaries. The trust is getting attention," Park said. "Some good, some calling it blood money." "It is blood money," Kang replied. "All money is blood money if you trace it back far enough. The question is what we do with it now." "They spray-painted the foundation office last night. Called you a fraud." Kang nodded. "They're not wrong. I am a fraud. But the scholarships are real. The security is real. The children are home. Reality matters more than reputation." Park was quiet for a moment. "Do you regret it? Walking the girl to school?" Kang thought about Nyla Reed, 8 years old, walking straight toward him with no illusion that he was anything other than dangerous, but asking anyway because danger was everywhere and at least his danger had rules. He thought about 4 children in a basement and 6 more who might have followed if no one had cared enough to stop it. He thought about the community escorts and Detective Mendez and all the small acts of protection that rippled out from one child's request. "No," he said finally. "I don't regret it. Though I should probably tell you that we lost the Anderson contract because of the publicity. $500,000 in revenue." "Yes. Was it worth it?" Kang turned from the window. She was 8 years old, and no one was protecting her. "Yes, it was worth it." 6 months later, Blackwater District looked different in small but meaningful ways. Children still walked to school through streets that were far from safe. Parents still worked multiple jobs for wages that couldn't cover rent. The systems that created poverty and vulnerability remained firmly in place. But there were escorts now. Organized watch groups. Anonymous reporting systems that actually resulted in investigations. A detective who finally had funding and support. A community that had learned it could protect itself. Nyla still saw Kang sometimes, usually from a distance, always at events for the trust. They didn't speak. The transaction was complete. He'd walked her to school until she didn't need him to anymore. The protection had transferred from one dangerous man to dozens of ordinary people who chose to show up. She thought about what Mrs. Johnson had said about opportunity and doing right looking the same from the outside. Maybe intention didn't matter as much as impact. Maybe Kang Dae-hyun would never be a hero, but the children were safer, and that counted for something. One morning, as Nyla walked to school with her community escort, she saw a new girl standing alone near the corner. The girl looked about 7, her clothes slightly too large, her eyes doing that watchful scanning that Nyla recognized immediately. The look of a child learning to identify threats. Nyla stopped walking. Mrs. Johnson noticed and paused beside her. "You know her?" Mrs. Johnson asked. "No. But I know that look." Nyla walked over to the girl slowly, keeping her movements non-threatening the way you would approach a scared animal. "Hi. I'm Nyla. You new here?" The girl nodded but didn't speak. "You walking to St. Alara?" Another nod. "You can walk with us if you want. It's safer with more people." The girl looked at the small group of adults waiting on the corner, then back at Nyla. "Why do they walk with you?" "Because someone has to watch. And they decided it would be them." The girl considered this, then fell into step beside Nyla. As they walked, Mrs. Johnson moved slightly closer, creating a protective triangle without making it obvious. By the time they reached the school, 2 more children had joined the group. This was how it worked now. Safety through numbers. Protection through presence. At Ravenport Heights, Kang received a visitor he hadn't expected. Detective Mendez arrived without appointment or warning, walking past security with the confidence of someone who knew she'd be let through because refusing her would cause more problems than allowing her. Park Min-jae showed her to Kang's study, then positioned himself by the door. Mendez didn't sit even though Kang gestured to the chair across from his desk. "We arrested 2 more men this morning," she said without preamble. "Part of the Ash Ring's northern operation. They'd relocated after the raids, thought they could rebuild." "Congratulations." They had a list. Children they were tracking. 43 names across 5 states. Kang set down his pen. "You're telling me this why?" "Because 12 of those names are from Blackwater District. Your community watch program, the escorts, the reporting system, it's working. But it's also making certain children more visible in the wrong databases. The predators are adapting." "What do you need?" Mendez finally sat down, exhaustion evident in the way she sank into the chair. "I need resources I don't have. Federal trafficking investigations move slow. By the time we get warrants approved and coordinate across jurisdictions, children disappear. I need real-time intelligence. The kind you have access to. You're asking me to continue breaking laws. I'm asking you to use your networks for something other than profit. Those 43 children, some of them are being watched right now. I can feel it, but I can't prove it through official channels fast enough." Kang leaned back in his chair, studying the detective. She'd aged in the 6 months since their first meeting, stress carving lines around her eyes and mouth. She was burning out in the way that good cops did when the system ground them down. If I help you, Kang said slowly, I need something in return. Mendez's jaw tightened. What? Tell me why you care this much. Because it's destroying you, detective. I can see it. Most cops would have moved on by now, would have decided they'd done their part. Mendez was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was quieter than Kang had ever heard it. I had a sister, Elena. She was 9 when she disappeared. Walked home from school one day in 1998 and never made it. They found her body 3 months later in a drainage ditch 40 miles away. The investigation went nowhere. My parents spent everything they had on private detectives and got nothing. My mother died still putting up flyers every year on the anniversary. I'm sorry. I don't want your sympathy. I want your help catching the people who do to other families what was done to mine. Kang pulled out his phone and made 3 calls in rapid Korean. When he finished, he looked at Mendez. You'll have access to my surveillance network. Any suspicious activity near schools, unusual vehicles, adults showing excessive interest in children, my people will report directly to you. But detective, you need to understand something. What? This makes us partners. Real partners. Which means when this eventually comes out, and it will come out, your career doesn't just end. You'll likely face charges. Conspiracy with a known criminal. Using illegally obtained intelligence. The department will crucify you to protect themselves. Mendez stood up. My career died the day I realized the system protects institutions instead of children. At least this way, I go down doing something that matters. After she left, Park Min-jae moved from his position by the door. You're taking significant risk. Yes. The other families, the ones with real power in the city, they tolerate you because you're predictable. You run drugs, you launder money, but you follow patterns they understand. This is different. This is intervention. It threatens the social order they depend on. Kang nodded. The social order that allows children to be hunted. Yes, I understand what I'm threatening. They'll come for you. Then they'll come. But in the meantime, 43 children get to stay alive. I can live with that trade. That evening, Marisol attended her first community watch training session held in the basement of Reverend Williams' church. 23 parents filled the cramped space, sitting on folding chairs that had seen better decades. Detective Mendez stood at the front with a whiteboard covered in photos and diagrams. This is what trafficking looks like in real time, Mendez said, pointing to a series of surveillance images. Not the movie version with kidnapping vans. The real version. Adults who build trust over weeks. Who offer rides, gifts, attention to children who aren't getting enough attention at home. Who identify the vulnerable ones and isolate them gradually. A mother in the front row raised her hand. How do we spot them? Patterns. Same adult at multiple schools. Same car driving slow through neighborhoods during dismissal times. Adults without children who show up repeatedly at playgrounds, parks, places kids gather. You're looking for people who are looking too hard. Marisol took notes, her hand cramping from how tightly she gripped the pen. This should have been taught to her years ago. Should have been common knowledge, not specialized training. But the system assumed that parents like her couldn't protect their children, so it didn't bother giving them the tools to try. After the session, several parents lingered to talk. Carlos, whose son had been rescued in the original raid, approached Marisol. My wife wants to start an escort program for the middle school kids too, he said. They think they're too old for protection, but that's when they're most vulnerable. That's good. They need it. She wants to know if you'd help organize it. You started all this, in a way. When you spoke at that community meeting. Marisol shook her head. I didn't start anything. My daughter did. She's the one who refused to be invisible. But you taught her that was possible. You think kids learn courage from nowhere? They learn it from watching their parents. Marisol thought about that as she walked home through streets that felt slightly less threatening now that she knew dozens of other parents were watching too. She thought about Nyla asking Kang Dae-hyun for help, about the audacity required to approach power directly and demand it bend toward justice. Where had her daughter learned that? Not from Marisol. Marisol had taught invisibility, silence, survival through smallness. But somewhere, Somehow, Nyla had learned a different lesson. That visibility could be armor if enough people were visible together. That speaking could change things if someone was willing to listen. That power, even dangerous power, could be redirected if you were brave enough to ask. Maybe children didn't learn courage from their parents. Maybe they learned it from seeing what their parents survived and deciding to survive differently. At St. Hilaire Primary School, the new girl Nyla had walked with that morning sat in the principal's office. Her name was Aisha, and she'd moved to Blackwater District 3 weeks ago after her mother fled an abusive relationship in another state. They were staying in a shelter temporarily, her mother working 2 part-time jobs while trying to find permanent housing. Principal Davis, a black woman in her 50s who'd taught in underserved schools for 30 years, looked at Aisha's intake forms and saw all the red flags. New to area. Unstable housing. Single parents stretched thin. These were the children who fell through cracks, who disappeared from school rolls without anyone noticing until it was too late. She pulled out a special folder she'd started keeping 6 months ago, after the raids and the community watch programs began. Inside were resources, contact numbers, emergency protocols. She called the community watch coordinator, who called Mrs. Johnson, who made sure Aisha's apartment building was added to the escort routes. This was the quiet infrastructure that had built up around Nyla's single act of asking for help. Not dramatic. Not newsworthy. Just a network of people who decided that protecting children was worth the effort of organizing. 3 months after Mendez began using Kang's surveillance network, they prevented 4 attempted abductions, identified 2 active predators who were arrested on unrelated warrants and are now being monitored, and relocated 6 families who were being actively targeted. None of it made the news. Success in protection is invisible by definition. It's the things that don't happen, the children who make it home safely, the ordinary days that accumulate into ordinary childhoods. But the other crime families noticed. The ones Park Min-jae had warned about, the ones who valued predictability and understood that Kang's intervention was setting precedents that threatened their own operations. They held meetings in private clubs and luxury restaurants, discussing the problem of Kang Dae-hyun's sudden civic conscience. Vincent Calabrese, who ran the waterfront unions and had profitable relationships with several trafficking networks, made his position clear. He's making us all vulnerable. Every child he protects, every predator he helps arrest, it draws attention to the entire ecosystem. We can't operate if spotlight's on us. Marcus Odom, who controlled the city's drug distribution, disagreed. Kang's been useful. He moves product efficiently, doesn't create problems. This thing with the kids, it's contained. Let him have his charity project. It's not contained, Calabrese insisted. He's working with a cop. Sharing intelligence. How long before that cop gets ambitious? Before she decides Kang's networks are too useful to limit to child trafficking. They voted. 4-3. The decision was made quietly, professionally, the way these things always were. Kang Dae-hyun had become a liability. Action needed to be taken. Park Min-jae learned about the vote through his own sources and brought the information to Kang at 2 in the morning. Kang listened without interruption, then poured them both whiskey. They'll move within the week, Park said. Probably make it look unrelated to the children's programs. A business dispute. Territorial conflict. And you? Kang asked. Where do you stand? With you. Always with you. But I think you should know that several of our people are questioning this. They're worried about their own safety, their families. They didn't sign up to be targets because of a charity program. Kang drank his whiskey slowly. Tell them they're free to leave. No retaliation, no consequences. I won't ask people to die for someone else's children. And if they all leave? Then I'll handle this alone. Park laughed, a short bitter sound. You're not a young man anymore, Dae-hyun. You can't fight an alliance alone. I don't intend to fight them at all. Then what? Kang pulled out his phone and showed Park a document. Every piece of intelligence I've gathered on the other families for the past 8 years. Financial records, trafficking routes, corrupted officials, murder contracts. Everything. If I die, this goes to the FBI, the DEA, the IRS, and 3 major newspapers simultaneously. Automatic release, can't be stopped. Park stared at the phone. That's suicide. You'd destroy the entire underworld. Yes. Which means they can't kill me without destroying themselves. Mutually assured destruction. It's crude but effective. You'd actually do it? Release everything? Kang met his friend's eyes. To protect 43 children whose names are on a trafficking list? Yes, I would. Word of Kang's insurance policy spread through the criminal networks within 48 hours. The vote was reversed. Not because they'd changed their minds about him being a liability, but because the cost of removing that liability had become unacceptable. Kang Dae-hyun could continue his children's programs, could work with his detective, could set whatever precedents he wanted as long as he kept his mutually assured destruction policy in place. It was an uneasy peace, the kind built on the threat of total annihilation rather than any genuine agreement. But peace nonetheless. 1 year after Nyla first approached Kang at the fountain, she attended the anniversary celebration for the Dae-hyun Children's Trust held at the community center in Blackwater District. The room was full of families, children, community leaders, and exactly 3 journalists who'd bothered to cover the story. Kang gave a brief speech about continuing support and expanding programs. He didn't mention the death threats, the alliance vote, or the fact that he'd fundamentally altered his position in the criminal underworld to protect children he would never meet. That wasn't the kind of thing you put in press releases. After the formal program ended, Nyla found herself standing near the refreshment table at the same time as Kang. They hadn't spoken directly since those first weeks of walking to school together. "Mr. Kang," she said quietly. He looked at her, seeing how she'd grown in a year. Taller now, still watchful but with a confidence that hadn't been there before. "Nyla. Thank you. For walking with me. For all of this." Kang was silent for a moment. "You know what I am. What I do." "Yes. And you still thank me? My mama says that people aren't just one thing. That someone can do terrible things and still do one good thing. That the good thing still counts even if the person isn't good. Your mother is wise. She learned it from surviving. From having to see people clearly because her life depended on it." Kang nodded slowly. "I want you to understand something, Nyla. What I did, walking you to school, starting the trust, helping Detective Mendez, none of it makes me a good person. It doesn't balance the scales or earn redemption. I'm still who I was." "I know," Nyla said. "But those 4 kids who got rescued, they're still alive. The 43 kids on that list, most of them are safe now. That happened because you decided it should happen. Maybe you're not good, but what you did was good. And maybe that's all that matters." She walked away to rejoin her mother, leaving Kang standing by the refreshment table considering the moral philosophy of an 8-year-old who'd learned to see the world clearly because her survival had depended on it. Detective Mendez appeared beside him, reaching for a cup of punch. "She's something, that kid." "Yes. You realize she'll probably be running this city someday. Girls who learn power that young, they don't forget how to use it." "Good," Kang said. "Maybe she'll do a better job than the current administration." Mendez laughed. "You mean the administration we're both helping to undermine with our illegal intelligence sharing?" "I mean the administration that buried your reports for 3 years and would have let dozens of children disappear rather than fund proper investigations." They stood in comfortable silence, watching families celebrate in a room paid for with money from drug trafficking, protected by networks built on violence, sustained by a criminal who decided that some lines couldn't be crossed even in the underworld. As the sun set over Blackwater District, casting long golden light through the community center windows, Nyla stood with her mother near the back of the room. Marisol had her arm around her daughter's shoulders, holding her close the way she did every day now, consciously choosing connection over invisibility. "Mama," Nyla said, "Mrs. Johnson asked if I'd help with the new escort program for middle school kids. She thinks I could talk to them about staying safe." "What did you say?" "I said yes. Because someone has to watch. And I can be someone who watches." Marisol felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. Her daughter was 9 years old and already understood things it had taken Marisol 40 years to learn. That safety was collective. That protection required participation. That the only thing more dangerous than being visible was insisting everyone remain invisible. "You're braver than I ever was," Marisol whispered. "No," Nyla said, looking up at her mother. "I'm just brave differently. You survived so I could be brave. That's how it works." As the celebration continued around them, with children laughing and adults talking and the ordinary sounds of community filling the space, the gray sedan that had started everything remained absent from the streets it used to patrol. The driver had moved on to easier targets in cities where no one organized, where no crime lord had decided to draw lines, where no community had learned that watching each other was the first step toward protecting each other. Blackwater District was still poor, still marginalized, still facing systemic inequalities that wouldn't be solved by one foundation or one community watch program. But the children walked to school now with escorts. Parents had emergency numbers memorized. Teachers knew the warning signs. And somewhere in the shadows between legality and crime, an unlikely alliance between a detective and a drug lord continued to identify threats before they materialized into tragedies. It wasn't justice. It wasn't even close to fair. But it was more than they'd had before, and every day they made it a little bit more. That was the lesson Nyla had learned and was now teaching others. That change didn't arrive fully formed. It accumulated in small acts of courage, in daily decisions to show up, in the refusal to accept that some children mattered less than others. The gray sedan would return someday. Maybe not the same driver, not the same car, but the same threat wearing a different disguise. Predators always returned because the systems that created vulnerability remained intact. But when it did return, it would find a community that had learned to recognize danger and refuse to look away. And standing somewhere in that community would be Nyla Reed, no longer 8 years old and invisible, but growing into someone who understood that power could be redirected, that asking for help was strength not weakness, and that sometimes the difference between tragedy and survival was one person deciding that some lines couldn't be crossed. If you found yourself gripped by this story, if it made you think about the invisible children in your own community, hit that subscribe button so you never miss stories that matter. Drop a comment below telling us what you think about Kang's choice. Was he a villain doing good, or something more complicated? And smash that like button if you believe that sometimes courage looks like an 8-year-old girl walking straight toward danger and asking it to choose differently. Because stories like this, stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary courage, they're the ones we need to keep telling until the world actually changes.